Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're diving into one of the most controversial and fascinating topics in ancient history. Texts that seem to describe technology, encounters, and events that shouldn't have been possible thousands of years ago. Now, before we begin, let me be clear about our approach here. We're going to examine these ancient texts objectively, looking at what they actually say and exploring the different interpretations. Whether you believe these describe ancient alien contact, advanced lost civilizations, or purely symbolic religious visions, the texts themselves are undeniably intriguing. So let's keep an open mind and explore what our ancestors wrote about the skies above them. Number 1. The Book of Ezekiel, the wheel within a wheel. We start with perhaps the most famous example, the biblical Book of Ezekiel, specifically the first chapter. Written around 600 BCE, this text contains one of the most detailed descriptions of what some researchers argue could be an encounter with advanced technology. The prophet Ezekiel describes seeing a vision that came from the north as a stormy wind and a great cloud with fire flashing forth continually. But it's what happens next that captures attention. Ezekiel describes 4 living creatures, each with 4 faces and 4 wings. These beings had what he calls wheels within wheels that sparkled like beryl or amber. Here's where it gets really interesting. Ezekiel writes that these wheels could move in any direction without turning, and wherever the spirit wanted to go, the wheels went. He describes the rims of the wheels as being high and awesome, and they were full of eyes all around. Above the creatures was something that looked like an expanse, like crystal, awesome and glittering. Now, from a traditional religious perspective, this is a vision of God's divine throne and the cherubim. It's meant to be mysterious and otherworldly because it's depicting the divine. But some researchers, most famously Joseph Blomrick, a NASA engineer, analyzed this description from an engineering perspective. Blomrick initially set out to debunk the ancient astronaut theory, but ended up writing a book called The Spaceships of Ezekiel, where he argued that the description matches a spacecraft with rotating components. The wheels within wheels could describe gyroscopic rotation. The eyes around the rims might be portholes or lights. The noise Ezekiel describes, like the sound of great waters or like the voice of the Almighty, could be interpreted as engine sounds. The creatures themselves, with their ability to move in any direction, might be landing pods or support structures. Whether you interpret this as a genuine religious vision or a description of something technological, you have to admit, Ezekiel provides an incredible amount of specific detail about something moving in the sky that defied his frame of reference. Number 2. The Vimanas of ancient India. Let us travel to ancient India and explore some of the most detailed descriptions of flying machines in ancient literature. The Sanskrit epics, particularly the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, as well as texts like the Vimana Shastra, contain extensive descriptions of flying vehicles called Vimanas. The Mahabharata, composed between 400 BCE and 400 CE, describes Vimanas as flying palaces or chariots. But these aren't just mentioned in passing. They're described with remarkable specificity. One passage describes a Vimana as a celestial car that resembles the sun and belongs to God. That aerial and excellent car going everywhere at will, resembling a bright cloud in the sky. But it goes further. The text described Vimanas that could become invisible, could travel to other worlds, could move at great speeds, and were powered by some unknown force. One description mentions a Vimana that was 2 stories high with many chambers and windows, and was so brilliant that it lit up the night sky like the sun. The Vimana Shastra, though controversial in terms of its actual age, contains detailed technical specifications. It describes different types of Vimanas, their construction materials, their propulsion systems, and even the training required for pilots. Whether this text is genuinely ancient or a more recent compilation of older traditions is debated, but the concepts it presents are fascinating. Some passages describe weapons that sound remarkably like modern technology. There are references to something that creates the sleep of 7 nights, weapons that emit fire and smoke, and devices that can track enemy vehicles. One weapon description talks about focusing sunlight through a special lens to create devastating heat, essentially describing a solar-powered directed energy weapon. Critics argue these are mythological embellishments, poetic descriptions of divine powers, or allegories. Supporters point to the specific technical details and ask why ancient poets would create such elaborate specifications if they were purely fictional. The debate continues, but the texts themselves remain remarkably detailed in their descriptions of aerial technology. Number 3. The Thule Papyrus, Ancient Egyptian UFO Report. Now let's examine a controversial Egyptian text known as the Thule Papyrus. This document allegedly comes from the annals of Thutmose III, who reigned around 1450 BC. The text describes something extraordinary appearing in the Egyptian skies. According to translations, the text describes how in the year 22, third month of winter, at the 6th hour of the day, scribes of the House of Life noticed a circle of fire coming from the sky. It had no head, and from its mouth came a foul breath. 1 rod long was its body and a rod wide, and it was noiseless. The text continues, stating that after several days, these objects became more numerous in the sky than anything else. They shone more brightly than the sun and extended to the limits of the 4 supports of the heavens. The army looked on with the pharaoh in their midst. It was after supper that these fire circles ascended higher in the sky toward the south. Now here's where it gets complicated. The original papyrus has never been found. What we have are alleged transcriptions and translations. Some researchers believe it was destroyed or lost, while skeptics argue it may have been a fabrication or misinterpretation from the start. The Vatican Museum, where it supposedly resided, has no record of it. But let's examine what the text describes, regardless of its authenticity. If genuine, this would be one of the oldest written accounts of unidentified flying objects. The description of multiple luminous circles, their movement patterns, their silence, and the fact that they were witnessed by many people, including the pharaoh and his army. All these details match patterns we see in modern UFO reports. The text also describes a ritual response, with incense being offered and the event being recorded in the annals so it would be remembered forever. This suggests that whatever was seen was considered significant enough to document officially. Whether the Thule Papyrus is authentic or not, it raises interesting questions about what our ancestors might have witnessed in the skies and how they would have interpreted and recorded such events, given their worldview and available vocabulary. Let's journey back even further to ancient Sumer, one of humanity's first civilizations, flourishing around 4,500 to 1900 BC in Mesopotamia. The Sumerian texts contain some of the oldest written accounts of what some interpret as extraterrestrial contact. The Sumerians wrote extensively about beings they called the Anunnaki, which translates roughly to those who from heaven to earth came. According to Sumerian mythology, these beings descended from the heavens and taught humanity various skills including writing, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and architecture. The most controversial interpretations of these texts come from researchers like Zecharia Sitchin, who argued that the Sumerian texts describe actual extraterrestrial visitors. According to his translation of the Sumerian creation epic, the Enuma Elish. The Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru and genetically engineered humans to serve as workers. Now mainstream scholars strongly dispute Sitchin's translations and interpretations. They argue that the Anunnaki were simply the Sumerian pantheon of gods, similar to the Greek or Norse gods, and that the texts are mythological, not historical accounts of alien contact. But here's what makes the Sumerian texts interesting. Their astronomical knowledge was remarkably advanced. They had a sophisticated understanding of the solar system, tracked planetary movements, and their mathematical system based on the number 60 still influences us today. That's why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. The Sumerians also depicted the Anunnaki in their art, wearing strange objects that some interpret as wristwatches, carrying peculiar handheld devices, and sometimes emerging from or standing near objects that look technological. One famous artifact shows figures near what could be interpreted as a solar system diagram with all the planets, including outer planets that shouldn't have been visible to the naked eye. The Sumerian king list is another fascinating document. It records the reigns of kings, but the earliest kings supposedly ruled for impossibly long periods, sometimes tens of thousands of years. The text makes a clear distinction between these antediluvian kings who ruled before a great flood and the more recent kings whose reign lengths are more realistic. One interpretation is that these early super long reigns represent something non-human or a misunderstanding of how time was measured. Another is that they're purely mythological, establishing divine legitimacy for the kingship. But the transition point where reign lengths suddenly become realistic is intriguing. Returning to ancient India, let's look beyond the Vimanas to the descriptions of warfare and weapons in the Vedic texts. The Mahabharata contains descriptions of battles that sound disturbingly like nuclear warfare, written thousands of years before such technology existed. One passage describes a weapon called the Brahmastra, which produced an incandescent column of smoke and fire as bright as 10,000 suns. Another weapon, the Agnya, is described as creating a blazing missile of smokeless fire that reduced everything to ashes. Descriptions mention warriors jumping into rivers to wash themselves and their equipment, much like decontamination after radiation exposure. There is a passage that describes the aftermath of a weapon's use. Corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, soldiers threw themselves in streams to wash themselves and their equipment. This description bears an eerie resemblance to the effects of nuclear radiation. Some researchers point to the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro in modern-day Pakistan, where evidence suggests intense heat vitrified parts of the city, and skeletons were found with radiation levels higher than normal. Mainstream archaeology attributes the city's destruction to more conventional causes, but the debate continues. The texts also describe time dilation effects, with warriors visiting the heavens and returning to find that much more time had passed on Earth than they experienced. This concept, which Einstein would later explain with his theory of relativity, appears in ancient texts as a property of traveling with the gods. The Bhagavad Gita contains philosophical discussions between the warrior Arjuna and Krishna, who reveals himself as the supreme deity. During this revelation, Krishna shows Arjuna a cosmic vision of multiple universes, countless worlds, and the vast scale of existence. Some interpret this as advanced beings sharing knowledge of cosmology with humans. Let's shift to ancient Japan and examine some peculiar artifacts and texts. The dogu are clay figurines from Japan's Jomon period. dating from around 14,000 to 400 BCE. What makes these figurines extraordinary is their appearance. They look like they were wearing spacesuits or protective gear. The Dagu have large goggle-like eyes, what appears to be helmets or headgear, and bodies that seem to be covered in protective clothing with various fasteners, clasps, and equipment. Some have elaborate decorations that could be interpreted as technological elements. The most famous, called the Shakoki Dagu, looks remarkably like someone in a space helmet with a visor. Ancient Japanese texts, including the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, compiled in the 8th century CE but recording much older oral traditions, describe the descent of divine beings from the heavens to the Japanese islands. These beings, called the Amatsukami, or heavenly deities, came down and established the Japanese imperial line. The texts describe these beings arriving in divine vehicles, performing impossible feats, and possessing knowledge and abilities far beyond normal humans. One account describes the deity, Nagati Heya, descending from heaven in a celestial rock boat, bringing with him divine treasures including mirrors and jewels. The Takenouchi documents, though their authenticity is heavily disputed, claim to be ancient Japanese records predating known history. These texts describe contact between ancient Japan and beings from other worlds, including detailed accounts of flying vehicles and advanced technology. Most scholars consider these documents to be modern fabrications, but their content mirrors themes found in more accepted ancient texts from around the world. What's particularly interesting about the Japanese accounts is how they parallel stories from completely different cultures. The theme of divine beings descending from the sky, teaching humanity, establishing royal lineages, and leaving behind mysterious artifacts appears across cultures that had no known contact with each other. The Dagu figurines remain unexplained. Why would ancient people create thousands of clay figures that appear to be wearing specialized protective equipment? Traditional archaeology suggests they represent spiritual or shamanic figures, perhaps depicting ritual clothing or tattoos. But their appearance continues to fuel speculation about what ancient Japanese people might have witnessed or been trying to represent. Now let's step back and look at the bigger picture. We've examined 6 different ancient texts and artifacts from cultures spanning the globe, from the Middle East to India to Egypt to Mesopotamia to Japan. What patterns emerge when we look at them together? First, there's the consistent theme of beings descending from the sky. Whether they're called Anunnaki, Amatsukami, Vimana pilots, or cherubim, virtually every ancient culture has accounts of intelligent beings coming from above. In the ancient worldview, the sky was the realm of the divine, so anything coming from above would naturally be interpreted as godly. Second, there are recurring descriptions of flying vehicles. The specific details vary, but across cultures we find accounts of machines or vehicles that could fly, emit light and sound, and move in ways that defied conventional understanding. These descriptions often include specific technical details that seem oddly sophisticated for their time. Third, there's the pattern of knowledge transfer. Ancient texts frequently describe these sky beings as teachers who gave humanity important skills and knowledge: writing, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, metallurgy, and architecture. The sudden appearance of sophisticated civilizations like Sumer, with fully developed writing systems and complex social structures, has always puzzled historians. Fourth, we see descriptions of powerful weapons with effects that sound remarkably like modern technology. From the radiation-like effects described in the Mahabharata to the directed energy weapons in various texts, ancient writers seem to be struggling to describe something beyond their normal frame of reference. Now let's address the elephant in the room: interpretation. How we interpret these texts depends heavily on our starting assumptions. If you approach them with the belief that ancient people were primitive and only capable of creating myths and legends, then that's what you'll see. If you approach them with the assumption that something extraordinary might have occurred, you'll interpret the same texts very differently. The mainstream archaeological and historical perspective is that these are religious and mythological texts. The beings described are gods and supernatural entities, not physical visitors. The advanced knowledge came from human innovation and observation over long periods. The similarities across cultures reflect universal human psychology and shared experiences of natural phenomena like meteors, lightning, and auroras. This perspective is supported by the fact that ancient texts also contain clearly impossible elements: gods transforming into animals, people living for centuries, magic spells that control nature. If we're going to take the technological descriptions literally, what do we do with the clearly mythological elements? The alternative perspective, popularized by authors like Erich von Däniken and Zecharia Sitchin, suggests that ancient humans encountered advanced beings, either extraterrestrial visitors or survivors of a lost advanced civilization. Unable to understand the technology they witnessed, ancient people interpreted it through a religious framework, calling the visitors gods and their devices divine powers. This perspective asks us to consider whether ancient texts might contain kernels of actual events that were interpreted through a mythological lens. Perhaps the gods were physical beings, the divine powers were technologies, and the heavenly realms were other planets or dimensions. There's also a middle ground interpretation: the ancient astronaut theory as metaphor. Some scholars suggest that these texts represent humanity's ancient contemplation of the possibility of other intelligent life, encoded in religious and mythological language. In this view, ancient people were philosophizing about humanity's place in the cosmos, just as we do today. Let's consider the context of when these texts were written. Ancient people were sophisticated observers of nature. They tracked celestial movements with impressive precision, developed complex mathematical systems, and built architectural marvels that still impress us today. They weren't primitive or stupid. They were intelligent humans working with the knowledge and tools available to them. So when they describe something extraordinary in their texts, we have to ask, were they recording actual events, creating religious allegories, engaging in philosophical speculation, or some combination of all three? The answer might be different for each text and each culture. Modern archaeology has shown us that ancient civilizations were more advanced and interconnected than previously believed. We've discovered ancient trade networks spanning continents, sophisticated astronomical observatories, and technological achievements that challenge our assumptions. Each new discovery rewrites what we thought we knew about the past. Consider the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a Greek shipwreck. This device, from around 100 BCE, is an incredibly sophisticated astronomical calculator with dozens of bronze gears. Nothing comparable appears in historical records for over 1,000 years. If we hadn't physically recovered this artifact, would we believe ancient Greeks could create such technology? How many other technologies were lost to time? This brings us to an important point. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Just because we haven't found crashed spacecraft or alien artifacts doesn't mean ancient people did and witnessed something extraordinary. And just because something is described in religious language doesn't automatically make it fictional. The truth is, we may never know for certain what inspired these ancient texts. We can study them, analyze them, debate their meanings, but we're separated from their authors by thousands of years and vast cultural differences. We're trying to understand documents written in extinct languages for audiences with completely different worldviews, describing events or concepts that may have no modern equivalent. What we can say is this: these texts exist, they're remarkably detailed, and they continue to fascinate and puzzle us. Whether they describe actual encounters with advanced beings, religious visions, philosophical allegories, or something else entirely, they represent humanity's ancient attempt to understand and record extraordinary experiences. As we continue to explore space ourselves, as we search for signs of other intelligent life in the universe, as we push the boundaries of our own technology, these ancient texts take on new relevance. If we do eventually encounter extraterrestrial intelligence, will our descendants look back at our records with the same mixture of understanding and confusion that we have when reading ancient texts? Perhaps the real value of these ancient writings isn't in proving or disproving ancient alien contact. Perhaps it's in what they tell us about human nature, our curiosity about the cosmos, our desire to understand our place in the universe, our capacity for wonder, and our drive to record and share extraordinary experiences. These texts remind us that the question, "Are we alone?" isn't new. Humans have been looking at the stars and wondering for thousands of years. The specific technology changes, our knowledge evolves, but the fundamental questions remain the same. So what do you think? Are these ancient texts recording actual encounters with advanced beings? Are they purely mythological and symbolic? Or is the truth somewhere in between? The beauty of these mysteries is that each person can examine the evidence and draw their own conclusions. One thing is certain: our ancestors witnessed something that inspired them to create these detailed, persistent accounts. Whether those somethings were divine beings, advanced visitors, natural phenomena misunderstood, or purely spiritual visions, they left an indelible mark on human culture and continue to challenge our understanding of history. And there you have it, folks. We've journeyed through 6 of the most intriguing ancient texts that seem to describe encounters with the impossible. From Ezekiel's wheels within wheels to Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki, from Indian Vimanas to mysterious Japanese figurines, the ancient world is full of tantalizing mysteries. If you enjoyed this exploration of ancient mysteries, please smash that like button. It really helps the algorithm show this video to more people who are curious about these topics. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss when we dive into the unexplained. What's your take on these ancient texts? Do you think they describe actual extraterrestrial contact, or are they purely mythological? Do you have a favorite ancient mystery we didn't cover? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single comment and I love hearing your perspectives and theories. Thanks so much for spending this time with me exploring the mysteries of our ancient past. Remember, whether these accounts describe visitors from the stars, lost advanced civilizations, or the rich mythological traditions of our ancestors, they remind us that humans have always looked to the sky with wonder. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep looking up.